welcome to Digital India Dialogue. Today we are talking about Broadband The Backbone. The entire Digital India campaign hinges on connectivity, and the most pivotal role will be played by optic fiber network and of course broadband connectivity to ensure that services actually are delivered to citizens. To talk about all that and more, we have a power-packed panel today, starting with Mr. Milind Bengali, co-COO of GTL Infrastructure, Mr. Ganesh Natarajan, Vice Chairman and CEO of Zensa Technologies. On my left is Mr. Kiran Karnik, former President of NASSCOM, and then Mr. Anand Agarwal, CEO of Sterlite Technologies. Mr. Bengali, let me start with you. The entire campaign of Digital India really focuses on connectivity, on tower rollout. But how significant or how difficult it is as far as rural areas are concerned, because that really is the biggest pain point for the government and of course for private sectors as well.
Yes, Gavri, before I get down to how challenging it is to roll out in rural India, I would like to emphasize that the low tele-density in rural India, as well as the huge data consumption which is on its way, presents great opportunity to both tower companies as well as to telcos.
Right.
Just a few points, Gavri. Tele-density, or I should say wireless tele-density in urban India is around 147%, while that in rural India is 46 to 47%. However, fixed line tele-density in rural India is still below 1%.
Right.
It used to be 0.6%. PC penetration again has been sub 10%. The point I'm trying to make is a rural subscriber is currently heavily dependent on wireless handheld to access both voice as well as
data information.
Data information.
Right.
Coming to your point in terms of how difficult it is to roll out, there are quite a few challenges for rolling out networks in rural India. One of them is how commercially viable is it to run a cell site.
Right.
Typically, a rural subscriber tends to use his handheld in the receive only mode, or like a receive instrument.
Right.
And therefore, a revenue that a tower generates or a cell site generates is limited. On the other hand, it's capex heavy to roll telecom sites in rural India.
Yeah.
The sector is, of course, sitting on a huge debt. Cost of finance is very high, because of which it's not commercially attractive at this stage to roll out sites in rural India.
Right. Mr. Agarwal, let me bring you in this as to how significant or how difficult really is it to really have rollout in rural areas, because as we're talking about that really is the most pivotal role in connecting Indians.
On one side, you got to see the opportunities that this rollout will bring to rural India.
Right.
We've seen what voice connectivity has created, the kind of upliftment of rural India.
Right.
And the same
opportunities are huge. I mean, that's the whole Digital India campaign all about.
So,
but
the challenges, I would say, are threefold. One is clearly a financial challenge as to who foots the bill.
Right.
If the government is willing to foot the bill for creating that economic upliftment, then it's a matter of creating the right policies, the right infrastructure. In terms of technically rolling out that connectivity, it's not such a big challenge. It's being done. It has been done in other sectors. If you think electrification of rural villages is also happening.
Right.
So connectivity is a pretty similar infrastructure.
Right.
You need to bring in optical fibers similar to power cables to the country.
So, Mr. Karnik, you agree with that? That it's not impossible as long as the government foots the bill.
Well, not necessarily. You know, I take Anand's point very well that the issue is really rolling it out there and can be done. I think the issue is to find clever ways of financing it. There are all kinds of models, whether it's a PPP model or a joint venture model or a long-term return model. There are different kind of financial models. But to me, the key is really the managerial part of it, because the technology exists, the capability exists, and as far as finances are concerned, I'm pretty sure that we can find very clever ways of doing it in one way or the other. The managerial capability and the managerial structure is a problem. In the present configuration, as we have seen, what used to be called the National Optical Fiber Network, now being rechristened as BharatNet.
Yes.
The problem is the structuring. You know, you have a certain kind of structuring with some public sector companies and some attempt to bring in the private sector, and it hasn't worked. We've seen huge delays. Clearly, we need a restructuring. We need something which is forceful, pushes it ahead, and does it really as a mission. We have experience in this country, even within the government, of doing these kinds of things. And I think we need to apply and put that experience on this. It's been done, frankly, with no bad intention, a very lethargic manner. And people like me, who tend to be very impatient, find it terrible. This is critical infrastructure for the country. It's as important as roads. The information ways or the highways are the new highways.
Right.
If you don't have them, nothing's going to happen. We need to get this. And we are keeping out a very large part of our population away from skills, from education, from earning more, from creating value, by not providing this connectivity. So I think there's urgency, there's haste, capability in the country exists. There are people in the panel who can get this done. They have the infrastructure and capability. But we need the right structuring, and that's not happened so far. I'm hoping now it will begin to happen.
Right. Mr. Natarajan, do you think that direction is the biggest challenge at this stage? We will talk about how, of course, the entire broadband connectivity is pivotal to the applications that need to piggy ride on this at a later point of time in this discussion. But do you think that direction is the biggest challenge for the government's most ambitious program? Because at the end of the day, broadband connectivity, or this program, has been talked about for a very long time. It's sort of lost steam. It has gathered momentum again. But do you think we're still far away from actually getting direction to achieve the target?
See, I think the intent is clear, and I've heard a lot of speeches in telecom, IT, and of course Prime Minister's office, because I think we all are aware that the previous experiment with the National Optical Fiber Network didn't really go very far. And
it didn't take off.
No, it didn't take off because there wasn't enough funding, and as you were saying, there wasn't enough management. So with BharatNet, or the National Broadband Network, I think, as Kiran was saying, people have been seeing it as essential infrastructure.
Right.
Physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, social infrastructure. All these are three components of the growth of this nation. So I think the mission is clear. What is probably missing is, like even in normal infrastructure, how do you execute on public-private partnerships? How do you ensure, as Kiran was saying, the kind of funding happens that needs to be done? Because otherwise, if you look at direction, we've all been told 250,000 gram panchayats, 600,000 villages, and that is critical. Because how else do you deliver services to the common man? How do they feel included in digital India? So I think the mission is clear. Get it done.
Okay. We take a very short break on this note. On the other side, we discuss how crucial is the role of spectrum availability to actually achieve these huge targets. Keep watching ET Now. Welcome back. You're watching Digital India Dialogue. Mr. Bengali, if we were to talk about the spectrum availability, private sector has all along maintained that unless and until there is spectrum to really reach out to the rural areas, this project will just remain on paper. Do you agree with that argument?
Yes, that is correct. Fortunately, a couple of auctions have happened where spectrum is being auctioned. Currently, higher frequencies are being auctioned. I think the sector would have liked to see lower frequencies as well, 800, 900.
That's a separate debate altogether, sub 1 gigahertz is not being auctioned. Yes.
Correct. But not only spectrum, but in rural India, you spoke of connectivity.
Right.
You need infrastructure, which is both the cell site and the tower, which I said earlier is difficult. And we mentioned about, or Anand mentioned about electricity in passing. I think that's extremely important, that EB connectivity or grid connectivity needs to improve.
Right.
Because of the 6 lakh villages in India, 20,000 villages do not have grid connectivity.
Power, right.
And those who have less than 12 hours, or the quality of power is low. And if you compare countries outside of India and the availability of spectrum, you would actually see there's a huge difference between what is available in India and what is outside.
Right. Mr. Karnik, besides spectrum availability, what else is holding back private sector participation? Or do you think spectrum is actually a huge, huge constraint?
As far as the broadband rollout is concerned, I don't think, frankly, that's the biggest constraint. It is really, as Ganesh mentioned, to an execution implementation issue which needs to be looked at. How do you involve the states who are critical players in this?
Right.
How do you set up the structures which are empowered to do this? And then very critically, we've talked of the broadband. These are the highways, as you said earlier. But you need that pagdandi, the footpath, that does what we call the last mile. And I think there are some great thoughts there on Wi-Fi and so on. The critical thing there is the business model. How do you make this viable for people to do this? And I think we've got to look at clever ways to do this. Maybe for healthcare or education, a coupon system where the government, which is subsidizing it, gives things to people which can access it, not just physically, but on the net. So ways have to be found to do this. But I think the critical part in the broadband, and the spectrum is a different
policy
issue,
direction.
is exactly. It's not so much the spectrum issue, which is a big issue by itself separately.
Right.
But on this, I think the factors are a little different. It is right of way, it's digging, it's management, it's state center cooperation, it's empowerment. And then for the last mile, it's, how do you reach out? There you need spectrum, but there it's not such a problem because you're not so crowded there. And probably you need to use a lot of Wi-Fi. After all, if you're going to 250,000 gram panchayats, then your outreach there could be by other means. There are new technologies, we need to keep space for innovation. There are very new innovative things coming up beyond Wi-Fi which you can look at. And we should keep that space open to see what can be done. If you bring in too much regulation at too early a stage, you tend to kill innovation. And we should be conscious of that and allow 1,000 flowers to bloom, and something will come out, somebody will come out with a good business model and do it.
And hopefully it will succeed.
It will succeed. After all, we've got good business models emanating from this country. The IT industry is the biggest example of a disruptive business model that changed the global scenario.
Absolutely.
We've had the famous sachet model of everything else. So we are very clever in devising business models. We may not be so good at R&D yet in this country, but business models, we are fantastic. So just leave it to that. But if you build in too much regulation, you build in too much control, and it's a highly regulated sector, it's thwarts innovation.
Right. Okay. Before we move on, Mr. Natarajan, do you think these timelines are way too ambitious and the government has just oversold on this?
No, I wouldn't worry about way too ambitious, but I think it needs to get done. And I think Kiran mentioned that. I mean, you need to address the problem systematically. So once you have a direction, if you implement it, it doesn't matter whether it takes 2 years or 5 years, to my mind. But people need to see a path. You'll always innovate around the obstacles during the path. But if the end destination is clear, I think we're all in good shape.
Right. Before we shift gears, Mr. Bengali, your thoughts on, do you think the government can actually incentivize a rollout of such magnitude? Because at the end of the day, it will put pressure on public exchequer.
Certainly, the government should incentivize both the telcos and the tower companies. Well, there are, like Kiran mentioned, there could be different business models. As I mentioned earlier, rolling out of networks in rural India is capex heavy. The revenues or ARPU in rural areas are low. The sector is sitting on huge debt. So possibly the government should look at letting the sector raise low-cost funds. That's point number one. Point number two is the government could incentivize the telcos by reducing the license fee for Sector C service areas, possibly to 1%. And third, specific to tower companies, I think unutilized funds of USO could be used to incentivize, support and subsidize tower companies directly for the rollouts.
Mr. Bengali, that's a very long wish list, and as far as reduction in license fee is concerned, that looks highly unlikely. But we take a very short break. On the other side, we discuss the boom in data services and how much will that really impact broadband connectivity in India. Welcome back. You're watching Digital India Dialogue. Mr. Natarajan, if we were to talk about the kind of data boom that is happening, if we were to talk about M-Wallet, M-Commerce, all these services, they will of course piggy ride on this huge broadband connectivity that we're talking about. But how soon can we see actual impact of this happening?
Well, I think you can see it pretty soon. And I'll give you a use case or a case in point. The National Digital Literacy Mission, which is something the Prime Minister announced, that one member of every family in this country, which is 220 million families, should be digitally literate. And we're finding that there is a lot of interest in making that happen. So in terms of what we are doing from NASSCOM Foundation is to ensure that all the cities, we're able to set up centers, we're able to get community schools to actually have digital literacy centers. But in rural India, again, the problem is that you don't have access. So while you can set up a physical center inside a common service center, I think the real value will come when you connect up. Because when you connect up not only literacy, but education, healthcare services, all those will happen. So it's not just data for the sake of data, but it's data to enable a better livelihood. And that is really what we should be looking at. And if you work backwards from there, then you will know what kind of, I mean, whether it's broadband or just connectivity that is required. But unless you do that, there's no motivation.
Right.
Because we all look at something called the National Broadband Network. But unless you break it down to every element of what can be benefiting the common man, you're not going to make that change happen.
Right. Mr. Karnik, do you think that change will happen only when there is hyper-local content? That is really a huge issue right now.
Well, certainly we need a lot of local content, but I don't think only. Because there are lots of
Multilingual
applications.
and,
Yes, there are lots of applications which are across. I mean, Ganesh just talked of various applications. Some of them like payments transfers.
Right.
Somebody from Bihar requires money when his son or daughter is working somewhere else in Bombay.
Right.
And these kinds of things are not necessarily hyperlocal. In fact, they're national.
Right.
But there are hyperlocal applications which are also there. And I think one thing which is emerging to all the new applications are heavy bandwidth consumption. Lots of video and so on. And so that is where, and we mentioned this only in passing, even the urban areas are critical. So far, much of the broadband focus has been on 250,000 gram panchayats, which is, I think, absolutely critical and is the right priority. But we need to look at the fact that very soon, we already have 300 million plus people in our cities, we have 500 million, and they're going to consume bandwidth like crazy. We need to have enough spectrum and availability there to be able to take care of this. And I worry that, if we don't do that, many of the applications which are exciting, necessary, and can take us forward will get killed.
Right. Mr. Agarwal, we talked about rural rollout, we talked about technologies. We, of course, now as a nation, at least large telecom companies are moving towards from 3G to 4G. As this transition happens, what do you think can we expect going forward? We talked about the content as well that is being prepared. What are your thoughts on our transition towards 4G?
Clearly, it's necessary that one clear example of digital literacy as well as content, people starting to use the content once it's the infrastructure is available, is the usage of say an application like WhatsApp. If you see a lot of the data increase that is happening for the telcos today in terms of their percentage of revenue is being driven by a lot by usage of WhatsApp. If you see the small and medium enterprises, how they use the features of using the camera, taking the photographs and sending it over a very, very meager resources.
Right.
So it's absolutely clear that if the infrastructure, as the spectrum becomes from 3G to 4G, as the backbone starts becoming more and more rich in providing data capability, applications are there. The entire internet itself is a huge application. There are many applications over the internet which, when provided to the consumers, they'll find ways around it. And digital literacy is going to increase that way itself rather than first developing a content and then worrying about the infrastructure.
Right. Mr. Bengali, we talked about power as a huge constraint right now. Do you think moving towards green towers is feasible, or is that something that we're still some time away from?
It is feasible. However, again, it needs huge capex. Including our sector, Taipa, we have looked at rescos, we have looked at various models to see how quickly we can move away and move towards green towers. The problem or issue here is the payback is very long, and again I come back to cost of finance. So it's a chicken and egg story there. Right. So somebody needs to step in. This needs to be like a PPP model, needs to have government intervention, needs to have support as a sector collectively to move this forward. Barring that, there are steps which have already been taken. Companies like ours or other tower companies have moved away from diesel. Sizable portfolio of our towers are now diesel free,
right.
Ensuring reduction in carbon footprint. Right. So those steps are already underway.
Right. Quick final comments on this issue. Mr. Natarajan, we start with you. Final comments on how far away are we really from this ambitious dream really becoming a reality, and what do you think are the big takeaways?
See, I think if you link up a lot of what Kiran, Anand and Milind have been saying, see, there is enough available in terms of ideas, and as Anand rightly said, I think the rich content or the rich media that has to be there, because you can't educate everybody in every part of the country unless you are using rich media. So you can't say that, look, somebody sitting in a corner of Mizoram will not get the same content as I'm giving to somebody in Delhi or Pune. So I think that's one thing. The second point I'd like to make is what Kiran very rightly said, that broadband is also going to completely change the way urban India works. I mean, right now we are working on a Pune Smart City program, and it's a very joint activity of industry, academia, the press and the government. And we're finding that, as we incorporate a complete citizen engagement program, for instance, I mean, if everybody in every slum has to be heard, okay, either through social hearing or just voice or any other method, you're finding there's so much of line drops, there's so much of discontinuity that's happening. Right. So across the country, whether it is two-way communication, whether it's education, it's healthcare, it's making Make in India happen by connecting SMEs, this is an imperative. So I think if we create the urgency, create the burning platform, and the burning platform exists, right. Okay, we will not build prosperity in this country unless people can connect. And connecting will mean listening, connecting will mean services. We need to make that happen.
Mr. Karnik, your final
I think this is a fantastic tool for empowerment, and we've got to give it the kind of thrust and priority it requires. The mindset in government should change from an accountant saying how much money can I collect from you to an economist which says what is the return for the country. That has a lot of ramifications, whether it's for spectrum or anything else. And it has to be driven in a way where this is seen as something that has to be achieved, tomorrow, and not one of those things that eventually will happen. It will happen eventually, but we have to do it in a hurry. If there's one thing we lack in the country, it's not money, it's not capability, it's not any other resource, it's time. And that's critical. We've got to do things in a hurry.
Right. Mr. Agarwal.
No, clearly, I see a mindset gap in the current thinking in terms of seeing that broadband is an extension of voice services. If you start thinking of broadband as a utility, then the whole way of thinking will change. And you have collected money through the Universal Service Obligation Fund. That's what you are supposed to do. You are supposed to provide that universal service. That's an obligation for you to do. So it's high time that the government goes out and does that.
Mr. Kumkoli, quick final comments on this.
I think we have started well with the Digital India mission, which clearly lays down 9 pillars. Broadband access is one of them, universal access we spoke about. We spoke about education, which is again one of the 9 pillars. And with, I think, the backing of the current government, I think things will happen. Like Kiran says, it will take time, but it needs to happen quickly.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out the time on this panel. The view is unanimous. Information highways or the highways that the government is looking to build must be built at the earliest. Challenges are many. The government needs to figure out alternative models of financing. It needs to get private sector on board. But the idea really is it needs to get all that and more done at the earliest because time is running out. Stay tuned to ET Now.